and I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Maxine Dugan. I'm the president of the Erotic Service Providers Legal Education and Research Project. We started in probably about 2010. We started to be able to address the lack of research regarding people in the sex trade, the lack of access to legal rights, and also to provide that education piece for the public and for our armed community, because there's such a lack of information, even with all the internet stuff going on. So today, we're going to be presenting on a report that was came from a grant from the Calix Foundation. It's the name of the report is Prostitution as Terrorism: Fusion Centers and the War on Sex Work. And our primary investigator today is Tara Burns. So Tara, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? And you can take us through your slide presentation about the report, and then we'll have some comments from Alex Andrews from SWAT Behind Bars, because some of their good work ended up in the fusion centers. So thanks so much. Go ahead, take it away, Tara.
Sure, I'm Tara Burns. I'm a sex worker and a sex trafficking survivor from Alaska, and I have been doing research. I have a master's degree in social justice from UAF. I did my master's research on the lived experiences and policy recommendations of people in Alaska's sex trade. And then it was action research. We were able to team up with Maxine and go to Juneau and use that research to change Alaska's prostitution and sex trafficking laws. And I have been doing public records research and participatory action research with people in the sex industry ever since. So this report, Prostitution as Terrorism, I mean, the first thing to know is that it's really hard for me to make this make sense, because it actually, our government does not make sense. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this make sense, because it doesn't make sense. And yeah, I'm sorry that it doesn't make sense. I'm going to do my best and to make it make sense. And I would love to answer any questions at the end. So this started with a previous research project that I did with ESPLERP, which was called Californians for Privacy: How the War on Sex Work is Stripping Your Privacy Rights. And during that research, we found out about all these kind of like lists that sex workers are on and databases of sex workers. And so I was like, what is there, do the feds have a list of sex workers? Are we on like the gang thing, the gang list or anything? And in the process of that research, I found out about fusion centers. So the National Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative was started after 9/11 to facilitate police agencies and others, airports, financial institutions, etc., right? Sharing information about people who are engaged in non-criminal activity that could be pre-operational to terrorism. So all the way through here, we're talking about terrorism, but every place that they have the word terrorism and it's all about terrorism, there will also be and other criminal activity, right? So fusion centers are basically function like email lists at the state level. They're federally funded. They're run by the states because of privacy laws, and federal interference and stuff, right? But they basically function kind of like email lists at the state level, where police, banks, anybody basically makes these national suspicious activity reports, and then it's emailed out to everybody on the email list, which is like all of the police officers and stuff. So immediately after fusion centers were started after 9/11, you know, they were basically being used to stalk Muslim people. There were a lot of congressional hearings. It's found many times that they're violating constitutional rights. And then a few years ago, there was a big leak of fusion center documents. So an unknown group hacked a storage server that had the low security clearance documents, and this amazing group called DDoS, Distributed Denial of Secrets, put those all online for us. Now, immediately when we heard about the National Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative and these emails, we thought about this tweet that Alex made in 2020, saying that they had just received an alert from an ally, that the Jacksonville FBI office found an email from them and sent out this email. And so when we looked through the BlueLeaks documents, we found the email, and it's this situational information report from the FBI, saying that SWAT behind bars, that they found an email from SWAT behind bars on the phone of a female sex worker that they arrested for prostitution. And the subject of the email was health and safety in North Florida. And they go on to talk about what SWAT behind bars is and that they provide community support for incarcerated sex workers. So this is really alarming to see on an email list that's supposed to be about terrorism. And this was kind of what launched our investigation. So we used the BlueLeaks documents, which DDoS really helped me figure out how to access those and was amazing. And then we also made records requests to several fusion centers. And because different state laws have different things about what they can release, the documents that we got from each state fusion center were a little bit different. Like Miami sent us a whole bunch of police reports, Rhode Island sent us a bunch of missing juvenile reports, Arizona sent us a bunch of human trafficking hotline reports. The only situational information reports, even though they all say unclassified right on them, came from BlueLeaks. None of the states gave us those. And then some states, so for example, Texas, this was funny, Texas has the Texas Homeland Security Act. And so when I requested from the Texas Fusion Center documents that have the words prostitution, sex work, they responded that those records are exempt under the Texas Homeland Security Act because those are terrorism-related records and they are not to release terrorism-related records. So our attorney did a little follow-up with them to kind of try to get them to say, why do they think that prostitution-related records are terrorism records? They didn't say. So I'm going to just kind of run through some of the findings really quick. This isn't all of the findings, but just to give you kind of an idea. So first of all, Homeland Security is really involved in defending the homeland from prostitution under the guise of stopping sex trafficking. So here's an example of a press release from ICE talking about arresting 134 clients who responded to advertisements for prostitution to purchase sex. And so this is Homeland Security is defending the homeland by doing prostitution stings in Dallas. So within our community, we know that Homeland Security has been doing these prostitution stings and that they have a lot of unethical practices during the prostitution stings, and there's basically no accountability for them because they're Homeland Security. They can't be held accountable in the same way in court that like local police departments would be. And there is a really important report called Homeland Secrets Operation Agent Touch by the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism, where they kind of did a deep dive on these prostitution stings that Homeland Security did in a bunch of massage parlors in Arizona. So when we look at the documents that we got from the fusion centers and how Homeland Security was involved in those documents, right? There's a lot of training documents and informational documents. Homeland Security has the Blue campaign where they are educating people that all sex work is sex trafficking, basically. So there's a lot of training documents that are sent out by Homeland Security saying like, oh, if people have money, if people are afraid to talk to the police, that means they are probably involved in sex trafficking, which is terrorism, right? So if you go to the Homeland Security website, sex trafficking is one of their priorities in addressing terrorism is sex trafficking and prostitution, because they are treating them the same. So one example is a woman that we'll call Anna. So there was an attempt to locate and arrest possible human trafficking victim poster sent out by Homeland Security about Anna, that they're, asking other police agencies to help them locate and arrest her for being a sex trafficking victim. She was arrested by the Bakersfield Police Department, and they found on her phone that she had texts from a contact called Daddy. So they said, we know that Daddy is a term that sex workers will use to address their sex traffickers. So they brought her to Homeland Security with this evidence that they believed that she had a pimp and was a sex trafficking victim, as Homeland Security had said that she probably was in their poster. She did not want to speak to the Homeland Security officers. They obtained a warrant for her phone, and the warrant they obtained was due to possible pimping and pandering. So they went to court and they said, this is a sex trafficking victim and we need to access her phone because there's sex trafficking happening and we need to go after this sex trafficker. Once they accessed her phone, they discovered that she had used websites associated with prostitution, advertising websites. So they arrested her for prostitution, and she was sentenced to pay $425 from her prostitution earnings, which under every state law that I have ever reviewed, it is a felony to receive money from other people's prostitution earnings, but not for the state, right? Homeland Security can put out a warrant or a poster, asking for somebody to be arrested for being a sex trafficking victim, and then they can, help that state take money that person earned from prostitution, which would be a felony if any of us did it. But when the state does it, it's just Homeland Security defending the homeland from prostitution, right? So all the way through the documents, we can see that internally, the FBI and Homeland Security agents, but especially the FBI, clearly understand that sex workers are autonomous business owners. We're capable of making our own decisions. We are capable of creative marketing schemes. And they're tracking that, right? On the other hand, they have this public narrative that we are all confused victims of sex trafficking, or that we are victims of commercial sex. So commercial sex is kind of this buzzword that we're seeing through all of the federal documents and working its way into some states now. So here's an example, right, of the FBI talking about our business practices and their understanding that we are independent business owners who are using Snapchat for advertising our escort services. And so this is, a contact who's reporting for the first time. So they've signed up a confidential informant to tell them that escorts are using Snapchat, which they could have found out with Google. I don't know, right? Legal online sex work is also being targeted. So this is an emerging intelligence report from the FBI Washington field office. And they're talking here that they believe that domestic sex traffickers will increase their use of mobile messaging applications and websites during COVID. And they say that this is expanding the threat of online commercial sexual services. So it's really alarming to see in these Fusion Center documents, which again are supposed to be about terrorism. This is about defending the homeland from terrorism. And they're talking about the expanding threat of online commercial sexual services in the United States. There were a lot of situational information reports about OnlyFans. And when we look at these reports about OnlyFans and we kind of look at like the timing of when OnlyFans said that they were going to stop hosting porn, and the timing if there was at one point OnlyFans payment processor, not the payment processor that they used to process payments, but the processor that they used to pay sex workers, just like malfunctioned and stopped their dealings with OnlyFans, and a bunch of sex workers didn't get paid for like 2 weeks or something, right? So when we look at the timing of these situational reports, and some of the situational reports are about their payment processors, it seems very likely that this federal campaign about the threat of online commercial sex on OnlyFans, affected sex workers' livelihoods really greatly here during the pandemic. So this is affecting, obviously, individual sex workers, right? And one of the primary things that we see a lot is sex workers talking about being stopped at borders, trying to enter countries, being turned away because of prostitution advertisements or online escort advertisements that they've placed. And so there's a lot of misinformation in our community that, this might be because certain websites are sharing our information with the government, which is definitely possible and probable. But what's also happening are that there are these databases like Traffic Jam and Spotlight that are crawling the web, crawling our advertisements, and using biometric data and other data to connect our advertisements with our legal identity and to put them in this database. And then sex workers, are classified as a form of terrorist travel. So there is a whole center of you know, policy making and dealing with terrorist travel, and we fall under that. So there's also suspicious activity reporting initiatives from banks saying that, people came in and deposited a lot of 20s or tried to exchange 20s for hundreds or hundreds for 20s, and that they think they're sex workers. There are a lot of reports about individual sex workers and sex trafficking survivors like Anna. Overall, there's just a lot of surveillance and voyeurism about sex workers. It's really clear that the government and its agents are obsessed with sex workers and with sex trafficking survivors. Our government, reminds us of the incels who spend their screen time seeking revenge against women who reject them for free sex, right? The patriarchy is concerned with guaranteeing men's access to free sex with women. And they are invested in punishing us for not providing sex for free, for setting our own conditions for consent. So our government is really acting like these peeping toms who stalk sex workers and sex trafficking survivors for a living, institutionalizing their revenge against women who charge for sex. It's the purest expression of patriarchy, codifying the persecution and punishment of women who refuse to have sex for free and casting us as terrorists in the name of saving us from sex trafficking. It's very weird and confusing. There were a lot of reports in the Arizona documents, a lot of reports from the human trafficking hotline. Very interestingly, they did not redact the names and phone numbers of people who were making reports, even though Arizona did redact a lot of things that are, like public reports, like the Trafficking in Persons report. They left the cover page and redacted the entire report, but they sent us the names and phone numbers of victims and police officers and attorneys and witnesses who were reporting sex trafficking to them. And we followed up by calling some of those people to see what their experience was like reporting. It was a small sample size, so we can't really say too much about it. But what we did notice really consistently throughout the documents is that police officers from local police departments, attorneys, victims, and witnesses are calling the human trafficking hotline saying, we've reported this to the FBI and we're calling them, following up with them, and we can't get the FBI to call us back. And then I will let Maxine talk about the policy recommendations.
Oh boy, my favorite part. Thank you so much, Tara. So we have for a long time been asking for more clear guidelines and time limits to respond to the public records request. We do a lot of public records requests around here at ESPLERP. And, I know that probably some of the journalists that are listening today also do a lot of public records requests and probably share some of my frustration with having those public entities not respond in a timely manner and, have to go through the rigmarole of getting the attorney to send the please comply letter. And, for small nonprofits like us, that's really a lot. And so we really would like to see more uniform around making public entities, especially police departments, to respond in a more timely manner, to be able to respond and provide those documents at lower cost. For example, in Los Angeles, Police Department right now has online all of the arrests that they make. So you can go and you can go look. And then I did a similar public records request, say, to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department recently, and they wanted to charge me $700 for the same documents that Los Angeles Police Department has for free. So we would just like to see some uniformity around accessing these types of public records so we can better inform ourselves and the public about what's really going on, especially when the police are using terms like human trafficking, but really they're just talking about prostitution arrests, misdemeanor prostitution arrests. So there's those types of things that we would like to see. More transparent government makes better government. We would like to see, financial penalties for those who don't comply with their public records or requests. We'd like to see a task force formed, where people like us could be on it to be able to provide some oversight for law enforcement agencies who are performing these prostitution and human trafficking arrests, because it seems like they have a financial interest to conflate everything. But really, in the name of justice, it doesn't really in the public interest to it's not in the public interest or the public safety's interest to conflate everything. We'd like to see the specific prohibition by federal law enforcement to not have any sexual contact with us in the course of these prostitution sting operations, because I can tell you so many reports have come in from people who've been caught in these human trafficking operations where the federal government, the FBI, Homeland Security are working with local, state, and city police departments to run prostitution sting operations, whereby the federal agents act as the decoy client, and they call, escorts or, people they're targeting for prostitution arrests to come to their hotels or try to pick, people up on the street. And they get to have all the sexual contact with us under the guise of rescuing us as human trafficking victims. So they can touch us sexually, touch our breasts. They can actually go on and have full on intercourse. And, prostitution isn't against the law at the federal level. It's only against the law really at the state and local level. So that's kind of how the federal agents get away with it. And so it's also not prohibited at the state level. So we see a lot of local police departments get away with it too. So we want to see a specific federal prohibition about making it a criminal offense, actually, for any type of federal law enforcement who are involved in these human trafficking sting operations to have any type of sexual contact with those they're trying to arrest or rescue as human trafficking victims. I hope I said that right. We want to put that prohibition in place there. We'd also like to see an expansion of, digital privacy. That because there's a lack of privacy laws here in the United States, we see, federal and local government law enforcement officers, really exploit everybody's privacy and collecting everybody's data into these databases that they're then being allowed to resell to the public, So, stalkers can gain access to a lot of information to stalk people that they might already have a stay away order in place. And, so the privacy violations end up causing, it just treats the prostitute nation and sex workers in general like, we don't have access to equal protection under the law. And we think that we do and that we should. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, established accountability and integrity laws to prevent the breakdown of intellectual rigor in policing criminalized populations. I don't know, Tara, do you want to say a little bit more about that one? Um, I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory. Removing prostitution from the moral turpitude laws. Yes, because right now in the immigration laws, the federal immigration laws, prostitution is listed as a violation of moral turpitude. So people can be deported just for being arrested for prostitution. And so we want to see that that reform in the immigration law, especially in coming up to the large sporting events that are going to be held here in California in 2026, 27, and 28. We have 2 Super Bowls that are going to be held here. We have FIFA, the World Cup is going to be holding a bunch of games starting, I think, in June of 2026. And then we have the Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028. So we're just really concerned that they're going to, the federal government, Homeland Security, is going to use these human trafficking operations that are really prostitution sting operations to arrest a bunch of people, and a bunch of people are going to be deported. And that we just think that that's not something that we want to see, especially when people don't have access to, a clear path to being, to get their citizenship so they can have access to full rights, right? That's something that we in the sex worker nation want. We want access to our full rights. Removing prostitution as a means to deport people, overhaul prostitution and sex trafficking training of law enforcement to ensure that policing practices respect all aspects of consensual sex work. So, yeah, because of that use of the Commercial Sex Act term is starting to show up in state law now. We see it starting to the federal government's going to start targeting things, legal parts of the sex industry like adult, film content creating, exotic dancing, um, spas, massage parlors. And so we're just really concerned about, that, really needing to clean up this bad language and the definition creep. So everybody is involved in sex work. I'm sorry, I can't see the last one because of the capitula is in the way and I can't move it.
It's
Hold on.
decrim.
Oh, it's decrim. Oh, of course. Remove the criminalization penalties for prostitution, both at the state level and to be able to prevent all this surveillance that's going on that we outlined, as Tara said in our last report, how the war on sex work is stripping your privacy rights, where we talk all about the technology that's being used on the public, supposedly targeting us or, human trafficking victims, but really everybody's ending up in these big, huge databases. So yeah, we want to be
So,
decriminalized. We want our clients to be decriminalized. We don't want people arrested for prostitution. We don't think it's necessary as a means to end terrorism against this country. And we don't think it's necessary to be able to identify sex trafficking victims.
So I think maybe I kind of skipped over, I wasn't very clear about an important part there. So Homeland Security investigations is part of ICE, right? So what's happening when we see these big press releases about the stings on the Asian massage parlors and all of these women being rescued is that these women are being deported by ICE, and then ICE or Homeland Security investigations, which is part of ICE, which is part of Homeland Security. I think they're trying to confuse us on purpose. Are turning around and telling the public that they've saved somebody from sex trafficking, when what they've really done is arrested a bunch of women for prostitution and deported them. And under the new administration, that is, we're expecting that to definitely ramp up, especially with the Olympics and the federalization of the police force during the Olympics.
Yeah, and before I pass it on to Alex, I'm just going to say briefly, that here in California, we have a proposed piece of legislation called AB 379, which does use the overbroad definition, of commercial sex act. And it's to recriminalize loitering with intent to commit a commercial sex act. So that overbroad definition, in conjunction with a, constitutionally questionable criminalizing, people's walking around intent to, you know, if it's becomes law, is going to be used on large swaths of, communities of color, low income communities like the Figueroa corridor in Los Angeles. That is the corridor that's being laid out for the Olympics in 2028 from SoFi Stadium up there in Inglewood down south to Long Beach. So we're just very concerned about how these overbroad definitions are going to be used to specifically target low-income communities of color along with Homeland Security, to deport, large amounts of people and displace large amounts of people. And they're going to use the prostitution law, the loitering with intent prostitution law, or commercial sex act to do it. So having said that concern, I'm gonna let Alex introduce herself and talk about SWAT Behind Bars. And how does it feel, Alex, to be found in the FBI's notes?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your efforts to bring this to light. And thank you, Tara, for I know your years and years and years of research doing doing stuff around this particular subject and getting all of those declines or just crickets from different law enforcement agencies. That's just so incredibly telling. When we learned that the Jacksonville FBI field office had circulated one of these emails warning law enforcement about a SWAT behind bars alert to our community about the upcoming Operation Cross Country, we were stunned. Whether they meant to or not, it was a clear admission. They were targeting and arresting adult consensual workers under the guise of fighting trafficking. We've always known about this. We've always known these things weren't about protecting victims. That was confirmed when the very email that they flagged was found on the phone of an adult consensual worker who was arrested during the sting and her phone confiscated. She wasn't a trafficker. She wasn't a traffic minor. She was part of our community, someone who we were trying to keep safe. That's what Operation Country Cross Country was always really about. It was a campaign that criminalized marginalized adults. Many of them are survivors of exploitation, violence, many different things, generational poverty. But they do it under the guise of trafficking. They claim to rescue victims. What's most chilling is that our warning may be the only documented proof that law enforcement knew who they were going after and did it anyway. This is more than just a failed policy. It's harm that is disguised as help. It's doublespeak. It's a betrayal of public trust, using terrorism to invoke fear about something that you don't know anything about is not using any kind of integrity. SWAT Behind Bars maintains that we have a responsibility to protect our people. We stand with the workers who were arrested in those stings, not because they were criminals, but because they were people who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And no, I'm not crazy about being on a list, but it is what it is.
Thanks for that, Alex. Do you want to say a little bit more about your organization? I'm going to open it up for questions. I think people can raise their hands and I can unmute you if you like to ask your question, or you can probably put your question in the chat too.
Yes, Swap Behind, I'm one of the co-founders of Swap Behind Bars, and we started because we wanted to communicate directly with sex workers who were incarcerated. We started out thinking it was going to be a fun little project that we would be able to do on the weekends by sending out 150 newsletters, and 2 weeks later, it was like a bomb had gone off in our mailbox. We got so many responses that we ended up having to get like a database. It was crazy. Um, but there was so many questions. People wanted to know what we were talking about. We've had so many clients talk to us about the fact that they have been involved in one way or another in the commercial industry, sex industry, regardless. But many of them were victims of other kinds of crime, and more than 70% of them are known to be experiencing violence before they were ever arrested, much less incarcerated. So decriminalizing survival crimes, specifically prostitution, is critical at this point. We told you it wasn't right to arrest adult consensual sex workers while you were looking for trafficking victims, and you have switched your tactics. It has not been helpful, but this is where we are. Come back to learn some more.
Exactly. And let's just really notice that, they use these prostitution sting operations to arrest actual sex trafficking victims and, burden them with criminal records and then attempt to traffic everybody who's arrested for prostitution into these shame-based, sex-negative diversion programs that are often run by people who have a particular religious belief.
Mhm.
They have contracts with local district attorneys' offices, and there's no accountability. There's no oversight of these diversion programs, and the diversion programs are always touted as reducing crime and, helping people exit from prostitution, helping shame, people who are clients of sex workers to keep them from paying for sex, I guess get it for free somewhere maybe. But it's just these are failed approaches. There's not a lot of research or data available about this particular aspect of criminalization. And we just really always are in struggle here at ESPLERP for finding more grants and more money to continue to get answers to these questions and to expose what's going on and what's working and what's not working. So we can just try to get to a better public policy, which of course we think is removing the criminal penalties and treating everybody with respect and dignity, as you said. So I don't,
Yes, Maxine, you did hit on one of my personal bugaboos, which is the end demand movement. The ridiculousness of this movement is just baffling. How people do not see that these economic impacts are going to be incredibly negative down the road. We know these for a fact, and the end demand movement is just it's very harmful, almost as harmful as full criminalization altogether. So thank you for hitting on that. That really got my cur up.
And we know that they know that end demand is not a way to stop trafficking, right? Because when we look at how they want to address trafficking in other industries, they are wanting to, and I mean, you see this all over the country with these, local laws to put up signs telling customers, doing outreach to customers, telling the customers if you see something, say something, call the police, right? It's only with sex work that they want to criminalize all of our customers so that they can never call the police and report sex trafficking. And that's actually a strategy to increase sex trafficking. That's a strategy to make sure that sex traffickers cannot be stopped and that there's more sex trafficking, which creates more business, more, higher statistics for police and for the rescue industry to get grants. They increase their income when they increase sex trafficking, and these are policies that they absolutely know will increase sex trafficking.
Right, because we have here in California and in Alaska and a handful of other states have passed immunity laws that say if you're a victim or a witness to serious crime, which sex trafficking, human trafficking would be one, you can report without the threat of being arrested for prostitution. So, by specifically criminalizing clients who are often the first responders to come upon somebody who is in a very questionable situation, who might need help, who might need the assistance of law enforcement, they would be highly deterred from contacting law enforcement. In
I
fact, our community at many times are the ones who provide people phones, give them a phone, help pay for their hotel room, another night, help give them a ride to their next right place to go, help them get their ID back without the assistance of law enforcement and without the assistance of all these human trafficking organizations who are sucking up a bunch of private donations, saying they're providing these wraparound services when really they're just not. Well, I don't see any questions. Do you have any final comments, Tara or Alex?
I think that the 10 things that you are asking for in your policy recommendations are well thought out. They are impactful. They would change the landscape, and they are not necessarily new. Full decriminalization took place in New Zealand more than 20 years ago, and now enjoy a much better relationship with law enforcement and sex workers and even brothel owners than what they ever have before. They recently undertook an effort to decriminalize migrant sex work, and that is also going to be a game changer for them. The amount of violence that goes down, the police have become allies, not something to fear. If someone wants services to get out of the adult industry, all they have to do is walk into any of their government offices, and they will give them whatever they need in order to see them through to that next step. And I think that that's the way that we need to look at it is take this opportunity of recognition and acknowledgement that we know what they're up to, and turn it into something that can be useful um, for survivors and for our own community members as well, because they need this to happen. Criminalization is not helping them, it's harming them.
Thanks for that. So we do have one question. Can you talk about why sex worker rights are important to all people, or how these policies affect non-sex workers? Tara, do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. So, I mean, that's a really big question, right? But prostitution laws, and the war on sex workers in general, right, is a way that society keeps women in line. So if you kind of look really broadly, like way back in history, prostitution used to refer to women just having sex outside of marriage, or even being lesbians, right? So anything that the patriarchy did not approve of. Prostitution laws have been instituted as a way to punish women who are engaged in behavior that's not beneficial to the patriarchy. And we see prostitution laws being used to punish women who are not sex workers, right? So the last two women to be arrested for prostitution in Alaska were not sex workers, were not sex trafficking victims, were not engaged in prostitution. They were women who called the police, or who actually both of them, other people called the police because these women were being assaulted and needed help and needed protection. And when police came, they ended up arresting these women for prostitution purely because of stigma, because they were homeless, they were Alaskan Native women, and they were, possibly mentally ill or drug using people who needed help. And instead of being helped, they were charged with prostitution. That affects every everyone, every woman who could ever be the victim of a crime, right? To know that all the person who's assaulted you has to do is say, well, she was just a whore, and you can be arrested instead of them, even if you're not a sex worker. The the surveillance and the terrorism rhetoric, right? So like we saw rolled out with Spotlight and Traffic Jam, which are these surveillance databases that surveil sex workers, right? So they started with sex workers, and now we have similar databases, for example, like Clear Insight, that are used against all citizens. So they roll these things out against sex workers, but we're just kind of the canaries in the coal mine, where the surveillance and the craziness is applied to everyone, to all citizens, not just sex workers. And these are, really interesting times in terms of federal terrorism rhetoric, right? We are seeing huge, it's moving very quickly. The definitions of domestic terrorism, the federal agenda to address domestic terrorism, which it looks like, is being expanded to almost to the level of like thought crimes. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years, if people like us and like Alex will be deported to concentration camps in El Salvador for, for being sex workers and offering mutual aid and organizing and research to our community.
Alex, do you want to address that question?
This is not new. This has been going on forever. I know that Tara knows serial killers who were not caught until they killed a woman who was not a sex worker. Bobby Joe Long in the 80s did this in Tampa. There were women that were dialing all up and down Kennedy Boulevard, and they never even bothered to investigate it until suddenly a woman who was just out late going to the liquor store for cigarettes one night, and he saw her, thought she was a prostitute, and killed her. So this is not something that we don't know, and I think that we need to be aware that this this patriarchy that is trying to take over our bodily autonomy are doing it in so many different areas. It's not just about being trans. It's going to eventually be about being a woman. Are they going to deport all women? Are they going to be just deport the ones that don't think like them? I think that this, I heard this phrase the other day, the pink patriarchy is something that we really need to be aware of, and I'm working on expanding that. But yeah, thank you for all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can just chime in and say, when we did the war on sex work, with stripping your privacy rights, we asked how much money local governments were spending on surveillance equipment in their prostitution sting operations. And it's a lot of money. It's a lot of public dollars going into making misdemeanor prostitution arrests, most of which, the general public largely does not want to see their public safety dollars spent on that, because they don't agree that prostitution should be a crime, and you shouldn't be arresting people for their private sexual activity. That it's a waste of money. And my really concern is that in the lead up to these large sporting events here in California, here in Santa Clara County at Levi Stadium, they're going to have the Super Bowl in 2026, followed by some of the FIFA games in the spring of 2026 here and in Los Angeles, followed by the Olympics in 2028. Oh yeah, plus the Super Bowl in 2027 in Los Angeles. So there's going to be, they're going to use the human trafficking buzzwords to justify a lot of public safety dollars going into arresting people for prostitution. And if they have the loitering law reinstated, that's a walking down the street crime. That law was repealed because it was unduly used on people just walking down the street, people that they thought, look like prostitutes, people that they didn't like the way they presented their gender, didn't like the way they wore their hair, had too much makeup on, had different kinds of clothes on. And so they would use that loitering law as a means to harass people, literally sexually harass people, institutionalized sexually harassing people. And then, of course, I'm thinking about, Linda Moran's case in Los Angeles recently, who was an immigrant woman who, came here to the United States to escape gender violence in Central America. And, she called the police to report that she was being sex trafficked, that she was being forced to perform sex acts. And she was in a hotel, and the police, Los Angeles, police department showed up, and they shot her. So here was a woman calling for help, and they shot her and they killed her. And they shot her and they put her in handcuffs. And then she was on life supports for 3 weeks before they removed her. So, this whole sex trafficking rhetoric is being used as an actual tool of violence against women. It's not ending violence against women. And as a public, we have to start to acknowledge that this policy has to change. It's bad public policy. We need to put a stop to it. So since if there's not any more questions, we're going to go ahead and end our webinar today, and thank everybody for joining us. It's being recorded, so it will be put up on our YouTube channel, the Sex Worker Nation at YouTube. And I think just because you have the link and you registered, you'll have access to the recording. So wait, one more question. Oh boy. Okay. It says, thank you. How can allies and the general public best help push back against the escalating criminalization? In particular, what can we do to help protect people who are being targeted by ICE and those in other vulnerable communities? Alex, do you want to take a crack at that?
Mm. Have them call the hotline. First of all, make sure that you have access to an immigration attorney or law firm. Don't answer the door for police. Don't answer questions. Don't tell people where other people live. Look out for the people that are in your community that are going to be targeted, whether or not they are legal or illegal, here legally or illegally. It won't make any difference because those people are going to be targeted as well. Make sure that you know your rights, that you know how to activate your rights, and that you are in touch with a nonprofit or and an attorney in regards to protecting yourself. The ACLU has a wonderful set of tools online for knowing your rights.
Thanks. Yes. And they can also donate to, Swap Behind Bars. They can donate to ESPLERP. They can, they're 501c, we're 501c3s. We're always open to, getting donations on our websites. I think the general public, we're asking people right now if they can help us in supporting, pushing back against AB 379. Because it is a really bad bill and it's going to be used to, wipe out a whole bunch of people and displace a whole bunch of people and deport a bunch of people. And we don't want that. We don't want our communities displaced. So getting help with that. We're also, ESPLERP is going to be doing, legal education workshops here coming up in the late fall, early winter. As part of our education track to help educate our communities about, how to stay safe during the Super Bowl that's going to be in Santa Clara in 2026 in February and the following summer games with FIFA. So we'll be working with people specifically to include a whole track about people who need protection against ICE, not just being protected against arrest for prostitution. So thank you all for your time and your great questions. And we will go ahead and say our goodbyes and see you on see you on the replay. And of course, all of our emails, I'll follow up with thank you emails to everybody and put all of our emails. I'm sure panelists would be happy to take further comments and questions. Thank you for your time.
Yay!